Yes. Okay. All right. We finally get to the beginning of our objective in this talk, and today we're going to talk about building the soul body. And by that is meant taking in and building more of the soul ethers into the vital body. That is, more of the light ether and the reflecting ether. Tonight we're going to talk mostly about the light ether, and then tomorrow night we'll talk about the reflecting ether and then move on to more of the process. Now, in an earlier talk, we mentioned that the biological ethers are limited. They're limited in their capacity all around, especially their growth capacity. Christ Jesus in the Bible refers to this in St. Matthew's Gospel when he says, "Which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit to his stature?" What he is saying, he's referring to the size of the dense body, and of course its counterpart in the chemical ether. He's saying that we can't, with our thoughts, actually change the we can't actually change the size of our body. We can add muscle, and we can get fat, but we really can't change the size of our bodies. Similarly, with the life ether of the vital body, we can drink plenty of fresh-pressed vegetable juice or fresh raw milk within 10 minutes out of the cow, and through digestive etheric digestion, we can make it part of our life ether of the vital body, but there are limits. You can't drink vegetable juice 20 times a day and hope to build up a reservoir in your life ether so that you have unbounded energy. There's a limitation. The lower vehicles are like that, therefore limitation. But with the soul ethers, they relate more to the higher vehicles. And there is no limit to the amount of soul material that we can build into our soul body. The only limit is our willingness to work and to do the work to build them into the soul body. Of course, the more we have of the ethers in the soul body, the better our consciousness is. We have a more rich consciousness. We have a more clear consciousness. We don't have this spaced out kind of feeling. Things feel, I don't want to use the word solid, I mean like this, but things feel more cogent. They're more held together. And the consciousness is better that way. Moreover, the more soul material that we have in our etheric body, the more the intuition has to play on. It's almost like pixels in a screen. The more pixels you have, the clearer your picture is, and the easier it is to project the picture onto it that is of good quality. And similarly, the soul body does that with intuitions that are projected from the spirit. Now, there are some similarities between soul body building and physical body building. When we think of physical body building, we think of exercising and eating certain kinds of foods, like raw eggs. Do you know they have things now where the bodybuilders eat maybe 30 or 40 raw eggs a day?
Yolks and whites?
Huh?
Yolks and whites?
Yes. I think I'm not sure. But what they do is they have special testing devices so that they don't get the salmonella. And so I just can't imagine something like that. For me, eating raw eggs is what you do to gag. It produces a gag reaction. reaction. Exercise of the physical body not only builds up the muscles, it gets rid of the fat, and we can build the muscles exactly where we want them. If we want to get rid of the fat, that is decided by the vital body. There's no way except liposuction or liposuction that you can choose exactly where you want the fat to go off. The vital body decides that for itself.
Is that why I don't gain weight no matter what I eat?
No, it's because you have a certain kind of metabolism. I think you may very well have what is called a pineal personality, and the pineal personality is one that is not nervous edgy, it's sensitive edgy, and that sensitivity causes you to buzz at a higher level. And okay, actually, some of the things that we do in our daily work build and maintain muscle. When I'm digging around in the garden, I very often have sore days because I'm building new muscles. Now, in the higher bodies, it's somewhat similar to this. They grow and they are maintained by use, just like the muscles in the physical body. They don't grow much in size, but they grow in concentration. They grow in density. They grow in quality. And the growth of the soul body is augmented and actually accomplished by exercise. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy, like all other spiritual schools, has spiritual exercises. And in the next several days, we're going to be talking about them, especially tomorrow and Friday. We're going to be talking about spiritual exercises. So, spiritual exercises are a large part of the life of a Rosicrucian student. Now, there are many different types of spiritual exercises, and a lot of them are traditional. They've been around for thousands of years. The Rosicrucian fellowship exercises are cosmologically based. They're based on the same principles that are operative in the cosmos, in its building, in its transformation, and in its dissolution. And so the exercises are designed so that we, in our like miniature solar creations, we are a product of the solar creation, and therefore the same principles that work in the greater creation work in the creation in us, and the exercises are designed to be in harmonious with us and with the greater creation of which we are part. We are like the universe. And the thing is, we don't want to be different. We don't want to stand out like a sore thumb from the cosmos. That's individualism. That's not individuation. Individuation takes place within the spirit and is harmonious to the spirit. So it's always best to work in harmony with the cosmos. And therefore the exercises are for that end. Now, you can do strange things with exercises. I once intentionally took a trip to Santa Monica Beach in California, if you know what that is. Santa Monica Beach has another name. It's called Muscle Beach. And when you go there, there are people demonstrating, or probably better said, parading their physical bodies. They are people that have developed their muscles to extreme and abnormal and in some cases unhealthy degrees, so that they're not at all. They have some sort of ideal. The muscle builders have an ideal, and they build toward that, but it's a pretty perverted ideal as far as I can see, because sometimes it is such that they build some muscles to look good in those muscles, and they become so exaggerated that they restrict the expansion of other muscles. It's called being muscle bound. And it's a weird thing. Now, it's possible to do that with specialized spiritual exercises. You would never believe the miraculous capabilities that we have within us and that we can develop within us. But some people do that. They specialize in one thing, and they specialize so much that they, how would you say it? They change the orbit of their evolution, and they are delayed in their evolution because of it. There are people that are now called autistics. There was a specialized class of autistics that used to be called idiot savants. For example, there was a young man at one time that if you said any date, like you said October 15th, 1840, by the time you got it out of your mouth, he could tell you what day of the week it was. And there was a woman from India who was not quite that deviant, but there was a woman from India that just died in the last month. And you could give her an extremely complex equation and she could solve it as fast as a computer in her consciousness. So we're capable of great things, but sometimes we specialize, and we specialize so much that we don't develop normally in other ways. Sometimes idiot savants can't even dress themselves, but you sit them down at the piano and they can play piano for hours on end, improvising all the music that they do. Some cases the deviation is even greater. There are little children that are capable of telekinesis. They can move objects. And they are usually antisocial children that harbor inside of themselves all kinds of anger and things like that. And they channel it into their psychic capability, and they can move objects, and they'll do it in front of a camera. Now, these things are very extreme, and they happen only rarely. But this is one of the reasons why Rosicrucian exercises develop an individual generally. We want to be whole people, and we want to continue to be whole people through the entire process of soul growth. And we want to be able to function in life. Because when it comes down to it, our life is the proving of what we are spiritually. It's our greatest creation. And what we can do and how we can do it is what we learn in the trials of life, and they're real. This is not a dress rehearsal for heaven. This is reality right here. No dress rehearsals at all. And this world fights back, and this world has limitations. So the proving of our ability to know the creation of which we are part is our ability to live our lives and live them harmoniously, productively, and creatively with the cosmos. Pianists, and I suppose guitarists too, have exercises. And those exercises are designed to enhance performance. They're not activities unto their own, though some people do get into exercises and they make that their end thing, but they are so that you can perform better. And this is a very healthy analogy to spiritual exercises. We do spiritual exercises so that we can live our daily lives better. We do them at peak moments, and in those peak moments, we develop things and we do better with our lives. And that's what it's all about. You know, this is it. This is the reality. And if we live better lives, the better it is for us. It's similar when taking in soul material and in soul body building. It is similar in the ethers to the way it is in the physical body. So we're going to talk about soul food for the rest of the night, but we mean something different by that than what is normally meant. we can see in this that through some of the exercises, some of them are done at peak times, like when we awaken in the morning or when we go to sleep at night. But many of the exercises are done right during the day while we are alive. The life of a spiritual aspirant is no different than the life of anyone else, except that it's lived at a higher degree of intensity. And one wants to be like those monks and such that are constantly have at the front of their mind the Christ or some ideal that they're working on. And that is an expansion of the exercises right down to every moment in the moment. So let's look at the light and reflecting ethers in much more detail than we've looked at them before. And we'll try to see the effects of them in our lives and see how we build them into the etheric bodies and see how we can use them with or without etheric vision. Now, a lot of what we're going to say tonight is extremely simple. So simple it even seems like it's simplistic. And so simple that some people might even consider what we're saying to be a waste of time. And that's a danger, because sometimes we become self-important, and when we have a great deal of self-importance, we think that we are too important to waste our time on little things. It's very much like Socrates says, the little things have in them great principles. So if we think our time is too important, we may miss a lot of things that are very important in life. If the story is true, that Newton was sitting under an apple tree and got bopped on the head by an apple, and that he started to think about it and wondered why the apple didn't fall up or why it didn't fall sideways, but why it fell down, that if that story is true, it applies, it just goes to show you how a little thing, even what would be considered a mishap, like a bump on the noggin, has great import to it. All of our understanding of the principles of gravity are the basis of an incident like that. I don't completely believe that story because he was involved with a lot of astronomy and developed the calculus in order to be able to predict the positions of the planets better, so that he had more accurate data for astrological predictions. In fact, he had predictions that came through right when he said they would, 60 years after he died. So we're seeking, what we're seeking has great importance, even though it's very simple. And let's begin with the negative pole of the light ether. Now, in an earlier talk, it was said that the negative pole of the light ether is responsible for coloration and pigmentation in response to light. That is the light ether in our bodies. It has also been said that use and exercises are how our bodies are built, how they grow, and how they're improved. If you put those two together, you can do it in a wrong way. You might say, if you combine those two facts and say, if I'm going to the beach to get a suntan, and in doing that I'm automatically building the negative pole of the light ether into my vital body, that's a little bit of an abuse of it. It probably does have some small effect. Everything we do contributes to our evolution. But what we're talking about is something much different. You don't self-consciously tan. And spiritual exercises are at their best when they are done deliberately and they're done self-consciously, and when we intentionally put our consciousness into the laws of nature to work with the laws of the nature. This is what it means to be a self-conscious servant. It means to go along with what is being done by the laws of nature, but doing it self-consciously and wakingly, and in that way it is sort of divine food for the spiritual being. the soulful activity at the negative pole of the light ether is somewhere, there's one exercise that we can do especially to make progress in that. And that exercise is perception. We said that all of the organs of perception function through the negative pole of the light ether. This means that the more we self-consciously and deliberately practice perception, the more we develop soul material. This means that just looking at things, the best example that I know of in history is Johann Goethe, the poet. He began observing more and more deeply, especially plants, like Shiloh was talking about before. And in doing that, with that deliberate self-consciousness, he not only perceived better, his perceptions went right through the physical plane into the ethers, and he developed an etheric clairvoyance. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was looking at flowers and was amazed at the intensity of color that there was in flower petals, and he followed, and he could see that there was more color than the petal could hold. And that was the beginning of the etheric perception, and so he began to see into the ethers from where the color was precipitated, and around the petals of a flower saw that blur of brilliant color. So this is what self-conscious perception is all about. We use perception every day. We drive down the road and we know that we have to be careful of this and that, and we do it by observation. But when we are deliberately and carefully and intentionally trying to learn things through self-consciousness, that's what is meant by the spiritual exercise. Now, in some spiritual philosophies, people are told that we must eschew the senses, because if we are living in our senses, we are living in illusion, and that we're actually taking ourselves away from the spiritual path by doing exercises of observation. The Rosicrucian philosophy is almost the opposite to that. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches us that the more we are in harmony with the cosmos and see it for what it is, the more we and the cosmos improve, the more we and the cosmos evolve. The people who eschew sense perception are the people who are trying to go back to the spiritual worlds. And they're trying to go back to the spiritual worlds by retreating from the physical. In the Rosicrucian philosophy, we go back to the spiritual worlds by passing through the physical in the same way that Goethe did it. It's a retreat to back away from the physical world. You haven't graduated, you have dropped out, so to speak, in consciousness. In a way, the senses, especially the sense of hearing, is the oldest sense that we have. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the Saturn period, which was way, way, way before what is called the Big Bang, which was probably a phase transition more than it was a Big Bang. The sense of hearing from when we were mineral-like was beginning to be built into our physical bodies. Because it is through sense perception that we see reality and that we fulfill reality. That's a very important thing to be doing. It's almost blasphemous to say don't live the life of the senses. It is important to not become attached to the senses and to become indulgent in the senses and seek pleasure in the senses, but to eschew the senses is to deny divine purpose and intent. Because of the possibility of becoming attached and indulgent in the senses, the Rosicrucian philosophy says we should use all of the senses, but that we should use the impersonal senses more than the personal senses. The personal senses are you touch something, or you taste it, or you smell it, and they all involve you personally being with what you are observing. Vision and hearing are different. They're at a distance. Hearing is probably our most accurate form of perception. There are not auditory illusions like there are visual illusions. But seeing is probably our most comprehensive form of observation. We take in more facts and relate them to each other in a glance than from any of the other senses. So you can see that the exercise that can be practiced all day, every day, of deliberate, conscious perception is a very, very valuable, very good thing. It's a way that it's the way that we advance ourselves. In the Rosicrucian philosophy, we're told to do everything we need to in order to clarify our senses. If we don't see well, we wear glasses. There's no indignity about wearing glasses, but there is to being ignorant and not seeing things the way they really are. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy has two exercises that work together with regard to sense perception. One of them is observation, and the second is discrimination. Students engaging in observation are told to observe things or to hear things as clearly as possible, so that you see every detail, and if there are distinct outlines, make sure that you see them distinctly. Now, there are psychological illusions that we are all subject to about seeing. There are some things that we see, and we see them very clearly every day, and then we don't anymore. We recognize them, and when we recognize them, we think we know them. And when we think we know them, we take them for granted. And then we don't look so clearly anymore. And our perception doesn't increase. I have about three, one of them I have been in touch with for a few years, 3 or 4 friends who are artists. And each of them draws every day. One would no sooner go without drawing than without eating. It's that important to him to draw. And each of these friends in conversation has told me, and some of them have been at it for more than 50 years, drawing every day. And each of them has told me that they see things better all the time. As they progress and life goes along, they see things better because of the practice of observation. None of them so far has reported the Goethe experience where they see right through things and into the ethers, but I wouldn't doubt it if they did, because that kind of faithfulness of performing an exercise in itself is enough to make one a more spiritual person. Part of this exercise is to see how the eye itself functions, and what its strong points are, and what its weak points are. It also helps one to gain self-confidence, because you can see things as they really are, especially if you can draw them. It's a very important thing. In fact, the Rosicrucian philosophy mentions in 2 places in the literature that it changes our consciousness. That when you see things as they are and you very carefully see them as they are, your inner consciousness becomes clear in the same way that your vision becomes clear. This is a really important thing.
Does that happen also with your bodily sense of just observing your sensations?
Yes. But we're seeing and hearing most, because they relate to usually to higher things and things beyond the person. And this clarifies our consciousness. Clear vision, clear consciousness. And it clarifies the consciousness more than a cup of coffee. I hope you don't mind teasing a little bit. Part of the improvement is because we're doing this intentionally. And we have to be self-conscious to do something intentionally. And we have to assert our will. If we say to ourselves, well, I'm going to pray for 10 minutes every day and I'm never going to miss, you'd be surprised at how much resistance comes up to that and how many things try to draw you away from that, and you build an enormous will by being true to what you say you're going to do. This is something that you don't have to set a special time aside for it, though you can. I know of a famous author who became a famous author by focusing his mind, and he did it by just looking at something, not making any deductions, not doing any drawing, but just taking 10 minutes a day and looking at something and making sure that he looked at something, and it changed his mind so much that he became a very, very clear writer. He's one of those people that gives things, those little vignettes on All Things Considered of National Public Radio. They had a writer that used to be on there. I haven't heard him for a few years. His name was Daniel Pinkwater. And he talks about that that's how he learned how to write, is doing the exercise of observation. Discrimination is when you bring the mind and the spiritual consciousness to bear on what you're observing. And so that the two of them, observation and discrimination, you begin to appreciate what is really there, and you begin to see what the relationship is. If you're drawing, you can't help but to do the kind of thinking that you need to do to get the perspective to get it right. And that is the discriminatory process. And if you're drawing, you can't draw everything. And so you have to discriminate which lines you're going to draw and which lines you're not going to draw. And when that happens, in order to bring the mind and consciousness to bear on it, that's a willful process. So all of these spiritual faculties are improved by the observation and discrimination exercises. It is almost our duty to observe, because when we practice the least little bit of discrimination about what we are observing, we see how beautiful things are. I can remember one time going to a show at the Art Institute in Chicago and looking for hours on end at artwork, and then coming out and I had the painter's eye. Everybody I saw was beautiful. Even if they were ugly, they were beautiful because you were seeing the reality, and it has raised your consciousness to a higher level. And that's a duty. Think of this. We are in quarantine or in exile or something like this in this three-dimensional world, and by our stupidity, which is another name for ignorance, we have closed ourselves off from waking consciousness and perception in the spiritual worlds. So while we're here, while we're in jail, self-made jail, doesn't mean that we're not valuable to the cosmos. We are exceedingly valuable. We are the only beings that have eyes and ears in this three-dimensional world that can self-consciously appreciate it. So all of the glories of God, the glories of the creation, We are the only ones that see the outside of it. God does not have an eyeball to see the outside of what is so beautiful, and this is our duty, and this is our privilege. All right. My goodness, we're going along swiftly here. We'll be done in record time. It may take about only 70 minutes, I would guess. All right, that's a little bit about exercises for developing the positive pole of the light ether. There's another part to it. You know, you actually can have a physical world clairvoyance. Beside a desire world and an etheric world clairvoyance, you can have a physical world clairvoyance. And a physical world clairvoyance is when your spiritual intuition is in perfect sync with your observation. And you look at something in the material world and you know what it means. And you're clairvoyant in that you have clear-sightedness into the meaning of what you are perceiving. The activity at the positive pole of the light ether brings us to one of the simplest and probably one of the most significant precepts for Rosicrucian students. As we saw in a previous talk, I don't remember if it was in the morning or last evening or both, we said that the light ether drives fluids. That is, it drives the sap in plants, and from without, it circulates cold-blooded animals, and from within, it circulates the blood. This morning we were talking about it, or was it yesterday morning? I'm so much into ethers I can't tell one day from the next anymore. There is circulation in the fetus before there is a heart. There is circulation when that is not due to capillary action. It is not due to venous contraction. It is done completely by the light spirit driving the blood. So we're going to be talking for a few minutes about driving the blood. Earlier in these talks, we mentioned how the ethers function as a buffering agency, transporting things from the outer world to the inner, and from the inner world to the outer. And the vehicles of transport have to be like what they transport. We talked about that this morning in the astrology talks. So the chemical ether relates to the dense physical body. All of its function has to do with the dense physical body, nothing more. Things are wasted or things are assimilated through the metabolic process, and that's all under the control of the chemical ether. The life ether relates to the vital body, and to the vital body primarily, not only, but primarily. The life ether is the epitome of the etheric body. It is the life of the vitality. And we mentioned that this morning, and we said that was associated with water. That if there's no water, there's no life. And so the life ether relates to the ethers in general. The whole quality of energizing things, of growing things, of reproducing things, those are all qualities of the life ether, and those are functions of the vital body in general. The reflecting ether relates to the mind. In fact, the Rosicrucian philosophy, which is developed by clairvoyant observations and checking out those observations, finds that there is a special resonance between the concrete mind and the reflecting ether. It's so much so that even the structure of the reflecting ether is like the hollow archetypes in the concrete mind, but that's a very sidelong topic, and I don't want to too much get into that. And without the reflecting ether, there would be no thought in either our physical or our etheric bodies. In fact, animals that do not have any reflecting ether in their vital bodies do not have thought. Some have a lot of negative pole of the reflecting ether, and they have memory, but those activities are specializations of the reflecting ether. So the chemical ethers for the physical body, the life ethers for the vital body, and the reflecting ether is for the mind. And now that brings us now finally to the light ether, which is the thing that we're looking for. The light ether corresponds to the desire body. The desire body and the desire world are a world of color. And all coloration in the physical world and in the etheric subdivision of the physical world is accomplished through the negative pole of the light ether. So we can see there is a correspondence between the light ether and the desire world. The chief function at this stage of our evolution of the desire world is motivation. Through desire, we are motivated to do things, to move about, to grab things, to give things. Those are all things that come as a result of desire motivation. And that in the light ether of the human vital body translates into what drives the blood. And the driving of the blood not only just drives the circulation and not only feeds the whole body, but it does it to the service of doing things in the body. Wherever the blood is where our consciousness is. If we eat a big meal, there's a lot of blood in the stomach. If we are sexually active, in both males and females, there is an engorgement of blood. If I try to tune a musical instrument, my ears turn bright red, because the attention of the spirit is driving the blood to that part of the body. Now this brings us to a big distinction in our organism, the etheric organism of the vital body and the dense physical body in the solids, liquids, and gases. We do things, and things are brought about. Actions occur, either actions within ourselves or actions with regard to the external world. There are two different agencies working in the physical etheric complex that get things done. First, there is what is called nervous fluid. Nervous fluid is what passes down the nerves, and the nerves then excite the muscles, and we do things through muscular activity. This is something that, material science calls it electromagnetic function. You can actually put a machine on, and you can actually see the impulses go down the nerves, and they claim it is at the poles of the sodium and potassium salts in the nervous cells that the nervous impulse goes down the nerves. Occult science, like the science of the Rosicrucian philosophy, claims that it is due to the nervous fluid, which is primarily comprised of reflecting ether. And so reflecting ether together with the chemical ether, which does produce the so-called electromagnetic phenomenon, is one means to get things done. Alright, I can skip that. The other means of bringing action into the dense physical body is in the fluid that we call blood. And the use of the word fluid is intentional. I did not use the word liquid because what spiritual seers find is that the blood is not a liquid. That the liquid is, that what seems to be the liquid is actually a plasma gas. And that plasma gas has etheric substance in it. And when you cut yourself and you bleed, the etheric substance leaves, and what you have is a liquid. And if you let the liquid dry, it becomes a crystal. And the crystalline blood is a unique signature, more unique than your fingerprints. That if you take your blood and crystallize it, the crystal structure will tell you about the character of the individual. The blood crystallizes differently in people who have cancer and things, things like that. So we have the fluid blood. Most of the time it is a plasma, including liquids and etheric gas, and it courses through our veins. The higher component of that etheric plasma is a rich amount of light ether. And it is that light ether that heats and drives our blood. Now the Rosicrucian philosophy says, just as we said earlier, that the circulation is due to the light ether, and that the heart is something like a booster, and it's something like a valve, and it's not the sole source of the circulation of the blood. But there's even cooperation between the nervous system and the blood system, in that the heart has a mind of its own, or has a brain of its own. It has the sinoatrial nerve complex that is what causes the heart rhythm. What do they call it? It's called the pacemaker in common everyday language. Any part of the physical body that is in active use has more blood. In fact, if we are generally trying to make up for something where we didn't do enough, we flush red, we blush, and that is because the blood. Now, some of the circulation is done by the nerves, because in the veins, which are on the way back to the heart, so they're very far distant and forward going from the heart, they need something to boost them, so the nerves stimulate muscles in the veins, and then the veins tighten and let loose and tighten and let loose, and they move the blood forward. The increased concentration of blood in the stomach, or in my case in the ears, is an effect. It's not a cause. The cause is the spirit, especially the life spirit. The life spirit, the home of the Christ consciousness, is associated with the heart and the blood. The nervous system is associated with the human spirit, where we find the self. And so the nervous fluid is associated with the thinker. So we can see that between the life spirit and the human spirit, things are effected or activated in the dense physical body. That each has its own relationship. The circulatory system has its center in the blood itself, and that is with the life spirit. And the character of each is different, because the human spirit is the separate self, and even the higher self is still separate. So there is an ingredient of self-centeredness in neuromuscular activity, whereas the blood is associated with the life spirit, which is the self of all selves. It is altruistic, and there is a complete unity in that life spirit. So the actions of the blood are sacrificing. There's that old mythical story that the blood keeps nothing for itself and gives everything, gives all the nourishment and everything to all the rest of the body. And that's very much like the altruistic nature of the blood and of the life spirit. So, the simple thing we want to say, and that is probably centrally most important statement of the entire week, is that if we want to build soul material through the positive pole of the light ether, it means we have to act from the blood. We have to act from the heart. Thus, every time we do something from the goodness of our heart, we attract more light ether into the soul body. That has to be repeated at least one more time. Everything that we do from the goodness of our heart builds more soul material in the light ether of our soul body. In the process, the heart actually becomes more and more of a voluntary muscle. And sometimes if you're really sensitive, and especially if you really had to sacrifice something you really wanted for the sake of the good, for the sake of someone else, and you do it from the goodness of your heart, you have what you can call a hearter. You have a sensation in your heart that you have done that. I have to tell the story. Many years ago, I had a friend that was a psychic phenomenon. She was a nurse at one of the hospitals in town here, and she was so psychic that she could walk down the hall and she could tell you what the vital statistics of each patient was going to be before she entered into the room. And she was always right. And she was so sensitive that the academics wanted to get a hold of her. And they wanted to build a psychic research institute around her because of her psychism. But her psychic sensitivity was negative. It was negative because she had one of the hardest lives I've ever known anybody to have of all. She didn't know who her father was. Her mother was raped by 4 Native Americans in a drunken spree. She was out with them and was raped by the 4 of them. They don't know who her father is. Now they could do it by DNA. And her own mother abandoned her. And then years later, when she ran away from the orphanage and the police department or the sheriff's department picked her up, they called her mother. And she came down to the sheriff's department to say, "Oh, I abandoned her years ago," right in front of her. And because of her negativity, she was a problem personality, a really hard problem personality to deal with. She was extremely, extremely needy. Also, because of her negativity, she attracted entities. And I used to go and sleep at her apartment sometimes when she'd be afraid. She'd go in the bedroom and I'd lay on the floor, on the rug of the floor, and sometimes in the night, as I'm laying there trying to sleep, the entities would come up and roll my body back and forth like it was a log. This was something really extreme. And it was at a time when Pluto was going over my ascendant. And when Pluto goes over your ascendant, there are things you have to do even though you don't want to do them. And she was my Pluto person. She was always on me. But there were times that I couldn't be there. And at those times, she would go to one of my friends. And that was a case in one evening that changed her life a great deal. And she was with this friend, and she was extremely needy, and she tried to get this friend to do something, and he wouldn't do it. And she's tried and tried, and finally, out of the goodness of his heart, he responded to her in the way she wanted to be responded to. And what happened was, she said, I saw like a little golden spiral, like a teeny tiny curl of hair, just go into his vital body and disappear. And obviously that vital body was just a little bit brighter after that. And that is a perfect example, a living example of somebody whose life was changed a little bit by seeing somebody else's life change a little bit by doing something from the goodness of the heart. It is, it's one of those things. Since Christ is the focus of the life spirit, there are words that we usually now hear only during cursing. If we do things for the Christ's sake, we are developing the positive pole of the light ether of our body. So this is what we want to do. We want to be sacrificial, giving people, doing everything from our heart. And this is why we have as a statement in our temple service the following statement, which is extremely important. Loving, self-forgetting service is the shortest, safest, and most joyful road to God. Loving, self-forgetting service is the shortest, safest, and most joyful road to God. Loving, self-forgetting service is the shortest, safest, and most joyful road to God. Let's all do it together. Let's do a sing-along. Loving, self-forgetting service is the shortest, safest, and most joyful road to God. Service is not limited to doing grandiose things. Service is doing whatever needs to be done and doing it volitionally. Not because you're compelled, but because you want to do it. And you do it from the goodness of your heart. Especially in the Rosicrucian philosophy where we are mental people, we have to learn to live in our heart. We have to learn to do that everything that we do it from our heart. Literally, if we're praying for someone, that is an altruistic action. But we can pray for someone with our mind, and that's not the same thing as praying for someone with our mind and our heart. That's, this is what makes us open and vulnerable. The hand that is open to give to others is a hand that is open to receive. And this is what opens us up to receiving intuition. It is what opens us up to receiving the Christ within our own being. Next time we will talk about acquiring the reflecting ether, and then we'll move into the organization of the soul body, and then we'll finish up by talking about exercises to put your consciousness into the soul body so that you can live apart from the physical body. For now, we'll close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Thank you very much. Cool air. We need cool air.
I would like to suggest in the observation category, today I went to the Shazen.
Oh, yes.
And they had these beautiful woodcut prints about a foot square.
You see them too, huh?
Yeah, and to think that these are over the last 300 years.
Oh, okay.
And the main thing is about the story of going to the seashell as the tide is ebbing. And that's why it's called ebb tide. But how this delicate stuff could be cut out of wood
Yes.
and printed.
And backwards.
Yeah, and then they have the poem written on there, obviously in Japanese, but they have the poems in English. Anyway, it was a very beautiful exhibit. It doesn't take that long to see, and it's only there through the 1st of September. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
If anybody's interested in beautiful observation, it doesn't take very long. I enjoyed it.